Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Over the years, I find I gravitate more towards indie films for their unique takes on classic genres. The need to be creative and surprising arises, more often than not, from a lack of budget. Thus, the only way to garner the attention of genre fans and critics is to tell a conventional story in a very unconventional way. Shifter is a prime example of this, as this quaint country take on time travel focuses less on big-budget, mind-bending visuals, but rather on its protagonist's foundation, which is being ripped apart not only physically, but also emotionally. Currently streaming on video on demand, Shifter is written and directed by Jacob Burns and is a lo-fi time travel film that materializes a smart blending of personable torment and trippy body horror. We meet Teresa, played by Nicole Fancher, a brilliant but social outcast stuck at a demeaning job that her brilliance makes her far overqualified for by light years. And despite her brilliance, Teresa is very much alone, not only in the terms of her intellect, but in her personal life as well. She lives alone in her old family farmhouse, which you can feel is haunted by anguish. On the rare instances where she does break out of her shy shell and ventures out to be social, sleazy men go out of their way to try to take advantage of her shyness. Though, for as lonely as Teresa is, her extracurricular project gives her purpose, a secret that defies the construct of time and reality, a secret that will literally rip her apart. Teresa has made a scientific breakthrough in creating a device capable of time travel, and she did it all from the comfort of her farm's barn. Given the film's micro-budget aesthetic, Burns made the smart decision to shrink the scope of Shifter's narrative down to the microscopic patch of backroads country. An unlikely setting for a time travel tale to unfold within, but it allows for Teresa's evolving emotional and physical turmoil to never lose its focus. After a successful time travel test run that her cat survives, it doesn't take long for an overeager Teresa to work up the nerve to step into the machine herself, which will change the fabric of her being forever. But as most experiments do, there are unforeseen consequences that have drastic repercussions. As any scientist would, she calculates a minor test of the machine's abilities to save herself from a date with a scumbag from her past. This is one of my favorite scenes of the film that displays Burns' smart use of time travel without overly relying on big budgeted effects. So in this scene, an old friend calls Teresa looking to get dinner or drinks, and from the outset, his general disregard for her as a person is very apparent. Despite asking her questions about her life in this time since they last saw one another, he tunes out her answers, more preoccupied with his phone, only taking a minute to comment on how hot she is. It's very clear what his true intentions are, as this isn't so much a meetup between friends, but a hookup, as it were. As he steps outside to take a phone call, Teresa watches from inside the restaurant as a hooded figure bumps into him. When he returns, he fumbles and drops a wedding ring at Teresa's feet and hastily tries to explain, as Teresa storms off to her car. A simple enough scene made memorable by Burns incorporating time travel to make this innocuous moment shine in spite of a lack of it being particularly effects heavy. Teresa, enraged by her date's behavior, uses that fire to throw caution to the wind and steps into her time travel device, sending herself 2 hours into the past to avoid the entire thing. But when she steps out of the machine into the past, she sees herself leaving the house, and she hitches a ride to the date, and we learn that it was actually Teresa who was the hooded figure that bumped into her date, planting his wedding ring on him so that way the other version of Teresa would see him for the scumbag he was. This not only makes for a great moment, but opens up the infinite loop theory of time travel, time being a flat circle, in that these events are happening over and over and over and over without Teresa even knowing it. And while this victory of her device working, and feeling vindicated in exposing a scummy date, is short-lived as there are drastic repercussions for using the device, she quickly develops extreme side effects as a result of her bending time. Pain, vomiting different shades of a strange substance, and no longer having a sense of when she has traveled to. To make matters worse, she no longer needs to step into her device to travel in time, as her body begins to deteriorate, ripping apart her atoms until she's completely gone, only to reappear in a new time with worsening symptoms. To take a page out of Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, Teresa literally becomes unstuck in time, and it's only going to get worse. This is where the film ventures into body horror territory as her body begins breaking down, literally being ripped apart as she dematerializes, only to return moments later with no sense of the amount of time that has passed. It could be hours, could be days, could be weeks. Teresa realizes she has no control over whether or not she's transporting forwards or backwards in time, and then the time jumps become increasingly more frequent. I will admit that Shifter's effects took a bit to grow on me. Initially, they're relatively subtle and not very impressive, but the further Teresa's condition worsens, the more drastic and painful her dematerialization becomes, which helps supply the film with several enjoyable sci-fi horror moments. These black lines begin to appear across her body and begin to glow as she seems to be rotting before the viewer's eyes. These moments can be sudden, and the more her symptoms worsen, the more impressive the visual effects become. And what is easily the most memorable horror-esque shot of the film is when Teresa dematerializes in a crowded movie theater. As she begins to groan in pain, her body slowly but surely begins ripping apart, and she rises and stands in front of the film projector as light passes through the segments of her body that have opened up, and she begins to scream in agony, terrifying those sitting around her. It's a standout moment within the film that displays not only her worsening condition, but also the seemingly endless brutality being inflicted upon her. Now, I'm not one to typically tout interludes, as they can throw a wrench into even the best of film's pacing, but here, Burns uses them effectively to convey tension. Periodically, the film cuts away from actors to a neon blood-red drenched scene of a black cell-like substance being split and ripped apart. This resembles the changes and alterations occurring inside of her body. These brief interludes not only reinforce our suspicion that her condition is growing worse, but also highlights the film's sci-fi body horror tone, even if its effects are not always up to snuff. To his credit, Burns realized he would be limited in just how effects-heavy Shifter could be, resulting in him smartly making Shifter's narrative character-focused, rather than telling a save-the-world time travel story you'd kind of expect. Teresa's discovery, as groundbreaking as it is, never distracts from her character being ravaged by repressed grief. She's defined by a dark period in her life, which purposefully fuels her desire to create her contraption and solve her predicament. This angle helps to detract from the noticeable small budget, as our investment is in Teresa herself, rather than expecting a litany of time travel special effects. Nicole Fancher gives a terrific lead performance that carries an added emotional weight to every decision she makes. Her unwavering determination is understandable, and as she progresses farther down the time travel rabbit hole, we want her to find the answers she's searching for. Further engaging the viewer through a smart time travel narrative is Shifter's time loop. As time is a never-ending circle, Teresa begins seeing copies of herself as she jumps through various points in time. Burns never wastes the viewer's time attempting to explain every parameter of how time travel works. Instead, the audience is shown. It's an easy pitfall of time travel, becoming bogged down in needless jargon, but at a brisk 85 minutes, the film succeeds where many outstay their welcome. Shifter clicked for me in a way that I didn't expect. It's a breakneck piece of rural sci-fi that succeeds in telling a dark story revolving around technology and personal anguish. I can mostly overlook some of the film's rough edges and initial, underwhelming effects because of its defining uniqueness and quality of its narrative. And that'll do it for another episode of the Daily Horror Habit. I'll see you guys next week for more daily horror movie reviews. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram and @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.